Welcome back to the History of the Church. Today we're going to talk more about the councils and see what Abuna has to give us. And we're going to recap what we talked about last time.
The church was one, as we said, until we get to what we call the age of the councils. So the age of what we call actually the Ecumenical Council. So we have councils that would gather together, groups of bishops, like from the very beginning. You even see it in the Acts, the book of Acts. When there was a problem in the church, they all gathered. It was the first council of Jerusalem. It's around 50 AD, and they were discussing a problem of, do people who are not Jews need to become Jew before they become Christian? So all the apostles, who are basically the bishops, they get together and they discussed and they agreed. So that's, and then throughout the first 200, 300 years of the church, you would have what we would call local councils, where some bishops in an area would get together and they would decide on things about how to organize their church.
So ecumenical is more like worldly?
Yeah, so ecumenical, that word comes from the Greek, ekumeni, meaning the world. So as far as the Roman Empire was concerned, we are the world. Anything that was inside the Roman Empire was the world. Everything outside was not really the world. For them, the world was the Roman Empire.
So like of the 5 C's then?
Yeah, mainly the 5 C's, but also all the other bishops in the area as well. So an ecumenical council is basically when all the bishops would gather together as much as possible, not necessarily the whole world, but basically if most of the bishops or a lot of bishops got together in one city, and it's representing all of the regions, the different regions of the world, and they got together and decided on something. And then if the entire church in the whole world accepted the results of that council, let's say, for example, some city in Europe didn't send a bishop to one of these councils, but if they accepted it, then they're part of the council, even though they didn't send a delegation. But basically, if the bishops got together and they agreed on something, and then all the bishops all over the world and all the local churches throughout the world agreed to the results and the decisions of this council, then it's considered an ecumenical council. So in the Coptic Church, we accepted 3 councils, which we call ecumenical councils. And then we always mention them in the liturgy. If any one of us attends the liturgy in the Coptic Church, we always hear the number of bishops and the city. So we talk about the 318 assembled at Nicaea, the 150 at Constantinople, the 200 at Ephesus. So in the year 325 AD, you have a council in Nicaea, and it had 318 bishops. They got together, and the whole Roman Empire at that time accepted the results of this council, so it was considered ecumenical. Then you had Constantinople, happened around 381 AD. The bishops got together in Constantinople, the whole world accepted it, it became ecumenical. Then you have the third one, Ephesus, at 431. They got together at 431 AD, and the church accepted it. For example, like 431 AD in Ephesus, initially not everybody accepted it. But then with a lot of discussions between the bishops after the council, all the bishops accepted it, so it became ecumenical. So the Coptic Church received those 3 councils as ecumenical. For example, what we call the Eastern Orthodox today, like the Greek Orthodox and the Russian Orthodox and the other Eastern European Orthodox, they accept what they would call 7 ecumenical councils, because there's other councils that happened after that that we as the Copts didn't accept, so we don't consider them ecumenical, but for them, they consider them ecumenical and they accepted them, so they talk about the 7 ecumenical councils. The Roman Catholic Church has maybe even more than that, because as far as they're concerned later on, and we'll maybe get into that a little bit later, there's these portions of the councils that the Roman Church put together even after the 7 that the Greeks carried on with, that they accept as their own ecumenical councils. But as far as the Coptic Church is concerned, we talk about the 3 ecumenical councils.
And what do you mean by accept?
Accept. So what happens is that in a council, let's say the group of bishops get together. The purpose of the council mainly is to say what is the correct faith. So if there's a dispute about what the faith is, who Jesus is, was he really God, was he really human, these sort of discussions that, what the councils were about, they would get together and they would discuss it, and then they would vote, and then they would make decisions. And during that time, all the bishops gathered at the council would write out the decrees and the statement of the faith. And then all the bishops at that council would have to sign that they agreed. So every bishop that signs, basically his church is accepting the council. And then at one point after that, say not all the bishops in the whole world were there, so the emperor would send letters with the results of this council, the decisions of this council, to all the other bishops. And then the other bishops would also sign and agree. So all the bishops who would sign and agree with the results and the decisions of this council, basically that's their acceptance of the council. So that's what happened throughout time. So the reason why these splits start to happen, mainly in the first, especially the first several hundred years of these schisms that we're going to talk about, is because a council would happen and then not everybody would accept it. And that's where the splits start to happen, the councils. The councils, as much as they were very good for us in general, but they're also part of the stories later on become sad stories because not everybody accepts it. And that's how these branching out or breaking up away of the different churches starts to happen.
So would these complications result because of one person only, or is it like a whole group?
Well, in each case it's different. So we can start maybe walking through, let's take one example, which is, well, not an example, like if we're going to take it chronologically, we can talk about Nicaea. So that's the first council, the first ecumenical council. Usually what would happen, which was the good pattern that we would like to see, which happened in the first three councils. Someone, a bishop or a priest, would come up with a wrong idea. And the whole church would then try to correct it. So at the council, that person would be given a chance to explain his point of view, and then the bishops would say, no, this is not what we received. This is not the faith that we learned from our previous bishops. And then they would give him a chance to accept the correct version of the faith. When he wouldn't accept it, they would give him several chances, and then finally he would get what we call excommunicated. Basically, you can no longer be a priest or a bishop, and this is the correct faith. So what happened at 325 in Nicaea? Just prior to that council, by a decade or just under 2 decades, Constantine finally became the emperor. Before that, we had all the persecutions, and especially the one of Diocletian. All the martyrs that we know happened, a lot of them happened during the time of Diocletian. That's all into the early 4th century. And then Constantine, around 312 AD, issued what was called the Edict of Milan. That's basically where he's saying Christianity is no longer illegal. So the bishops are no longer people in hiding. The church is no longer underground and persecuted and opposed. The church is now free. They can preach freely, they can pray freely, and they're no longer persecuted for their faith. But during that time, towards the end of the era of Diocletian, in the first decade of the 4th century, Arius comes into the picture. Arius was a priest who was serving in the Alexandria area, and he had come up with this idea which the church considered to be kind of weird. What was the idea? He was saying that we believe in a Trinity, which is the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. But then he had this problem. He said, how can we say that there is one God, and then we talk about 3? So his solution was, well, therefore the Son isn't really fully God. He's sort of like somewhere in between. He's more than human, but he isn't fully God exactly. And we can maybe continue that maybe next time.
Thank you, Buna. Next time we will find out what happened at Nicaea, and we'll continue on within the next few episodes.